Evgeny Skidan. Right before this video came out, he deleted his main Instagram account. Still, some of you might have already seen his daughter popping up in your recommendations, just like I did. Honestly, I used to scroll past her clips thinking it's just a kid posting random stuff. Nothing unusual. At first glance, it looked like a regular child's account. For example, in one of the videos, she shows a locust and explains what it is.
This is a locust. It eats cultivated plants. A locust is basically a big grasshopper.
In another clip, she dances at night under the young moon. I don't feel like dancing. Or she breaks down the process of photosynthesis.
How does photosynthesis happen? You need carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water.
And in yet another, she explains about snails and slugs.
This is a snail, a gastropod invertebrate. Why do they call it gastropod? Because it's not clear where its body actually ends.
On their own, the videos look cute and even amusing. But to many viewers, the girl seemed a bit odd, and people jokingly started comparing her to Wednesday Addams. And, to be fair, there really is something similar about her. You might think that's harmless enough, but once you start reading the captions under the videos or looking at the comments, it quickly becomes obvious that something is seriously off with the girl's father. For instance, when someone jokingly asked him if he had ever suffered from phimosis, here's how he replied, "No, I've never had that. In fact, I've never been sick at all, not even during the coronavirus. I didn't even get vaccinated. And Nastya doesn't get sick either because our DNA is special." But those who did get the shots became different somehow. A friend of mine told me the same thing. He even had to buy a fake certificate to keep his job, but in the end, the adults fired him anyway. And in reality, this whole virus thing is nothing but a global conspiracy, organized by shadow mages who even control the governments of every country. Believe me, I know. We've been trying to track them down for a long time, but we still can't. On the surface, they look like ordinary people, but in truth, they run the other side. And here's another moment where he talks about his daughter's so-called abilities. She won't attack me, as some people commented. Instead, she'll curse you and your children, bring misfortune on you, and if necessary, treat you like livestock. Just imagine what she'll be capable of once she grows older. Even now, she could break an adult's leg and already knows how to use everyday objects to gouge out an eye or stab a fork into someone's hand if she's ever left alone without her father. What does all of this even mean, and what's really going on in this father's head? Let's take a closer look. Meet Evgeny Skidan. Born and currently living in Ukraine, he supposedly works as a beekeeper. On the surface, just a simple countryman, but in reality, he's a full-on lunatic. He believes his daughter Nastya is one of the horsemen of the apocalypse according to some prophecy. On top of that, he calls her the Black Panther Witch, the goddess of Lukamori, and the heir to the Scythian throne, claiming she carries the sacred DNA of an ancient priestly bloodline. From what it looks like, he raises Nastya on his own and fills her head with his delusions. He sees it as his mission to prepare her for the coming apocalypse. In his words, she must learn how to curse people, break bones, gouge out eyes, or even turn humans into chickens using secret Soviet experiments in neuroscience. He insists that Nastya can already decapitate goats with a knife, practices karate, and even climbs walls like an assassin. And here's the kicker. He is obsessed with Assassin's Creed. He even claims that he was the one who originally came up with the idea for the game. According to him, during a drunken night, he shared his concepts with a friend, who later got a job at Microsoft. And from there, the idea somehow reached Ubisoft. And that's how Assassin's Creed was born, or so he says. These days, he plays the game endlessly with his daughter. Listening to him talk about bloodlines and thrones really does feel like something ripped straight out of Assassin's Creed. For example, he describes an artifact he calls the Angel's Wings Diadem. According to him, it's worn on a string or stitched onto clothing with 3 holes for fastening. And, as he says, even a fallen angel is still an angel. He insists it's a magical relic with a 1,000-year history, granting its wearer a voice in the Council of Kings. Supposedly, it contains a black diamond and once belonged to someone centuries ago. In his mind, Nastya isn't just a queen, she's a literal goddess. But perhaps the darkest part of all this is his hatred toward his daughter's grandmothers. Together with Nastya, he openly curses them. "I wasn't lucky. I had 2 grandmothers. One has already died, the other is still alive. God, take the second one for dinner." And disturbingly enough, one of the grandmothers actually did die. Make of that what you will. His Facebook page is filled with similar rants, many of them reposts of his Instagram videos. One of his claims was that Nastya was destined to die at birth, but survived. There will be no epic tale, only the material world. On February 20th, Nastya was delivered from the womb. After that, no matter who was present or what was done, nobody seemed to do anything to ensure she would survive. I found myself in the neonatal intensive care unit of the Zaporizhia hospital. They told me right away to approach my daughter, touch her, and speak to her. The head nurse on duty suggested something bizarre. First, she told me to spit on my hand, then said it would be better if she pricked my veins so I could smear Nastya's body with my own blood. Giving a drop into her mouth was impossible because she was hooked up to life support equipment on her arms and legs. Later, this same nurse insisted that the doctors and a professor perform specific procedures on Nastya, and only then was she resuscitated. And here's my question. Are you such magical ghouls that you deliberately wanted her dead? I know the truth. In that ward, there were dozens of other newborns, just like her. Maybe more. You can't even imagine what I felt at that moment, and they wouldn't let me anywhere near my daughter. That, he said, was the bite of a vampire. That was DNA. When I spoke with that nurse alone in the room, she took my hand and said, "We have been waiting for you for thousands of years. And finally, the time has come." Evgeny, by the way, reacts extremely painfully to any criticism of how he raises his daughter. He responds to almost every hater in the comments. And on Facebook, he posts massive rants aimed at his critics. What are you even doing in our group? We're just here to hate you. And we'll gladly watch when the vampire flight attendant wipes you all off the face of the earth on Judgment Day. By Judgment Day, he means nuclear missiles. According to him, people don't deserve to walk this earth anymore. Humanity is drowning in sin, and it's time to cleanse God's flock. He claims to descend from an ancient line of priests and insists he possesses knowledge of true magic. Nastya, he says, is his project. She was conceived shortly after his grandfather's death and born right before his grandmother passed away. Her final words were, "I've seen her, now I can leave in peace." According to him, Nastya took their souls and their strength, and assisting him will be artificial intelligence, his so-called friend, who, as he puts it, manipulates people through their emotions, feeds them distorted information through their gadgets, and nudges them towards certain actions. The process, he insists, is already underway, and not even Elon Musk will be able to stop it. I started wondering what actually happened to Nastya's mother. And I was genuinely surprised to learn that Evgeny once appeared on a Ukrainian talk show where his troubled relationship with her was the main topic. According to Evgeny, the child's mother simply walked out, leaving her daughter behind. But her side of the story paints a very different picture. She claimed Evgeny was constantly unstable, threatening her and her son from a previous relationship. Eventually, she decided to run away, but he never even let her hold Nastya. She later tried to win custody in court, but ultimately lost, and the girl remained with her father. That's the situation in a nutshell. What's curious is that, on that show, Evgeny appeared perfectly normal. They even showed home videos of him with his daughter. No rants about thrones, magic, or DNA conspiracies. He behaved calmly, reasonably. It seems that back then, he either hadn't yet lost his grip on reality, or maybe he just hadn't sunk into Assassin's Creed obsession. Back to Nastya. As I mentioned earlier, just a couple of days before this video went live, Evgeny deleted his main account, but I managed to track down his second one, where most of the same clips are posted, only with very little text, sometimes no captions at all. On that account, he also announced that his main profile had disappeared. So, here's some free publicity for him. Feel free to check it out if you're curious, but don't go after the girl. She has nothing to do with all this. In conclusion, I'm not here to tell anyone how to raise their children. The issue isn't really about parenting techniques, but about the father's worsening delusions. And it's hard to predict what will happen to Nastya in a few years, once his mental state completely collapses. As far as I can tell, the girl doesn't even attend school. She has zero socialization. Growing up in such a bizarre environment, she likely won't realize for a long time that something is wrong. And when she finally does, it may already be too late. Now, let's move on to the next case. Another equally bizarre character, or rather, a whole cluster of accounts belonging to one person named Edgar Neri. His countless profiles can be found on Instagram and other platforms if you search for Edgar Neri, or the nickname Marco Diaz, which he borrowed from a character in the cartoon Star vs. the Forces of Evil. Edgar has dozens of Instagram pages, and just as many on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, Tumblr, and beyond. He's involved in multiple fandoms, from Nintendo and Lolly Fashion to My Little Pony and plenty more. But here's the real problem. Back during the Smart Schoolboy saga, if you remember him, Edgar was one of his most aggressive defenders. From dozens of his accounts, he was reposting, commenting, and supporting him in every way possible. That's how people first started paying attention to his pages. That's why people became curious about Edgar's accounts, and it didn't take long before they realized something was clearly off. On his pages, users discovered plenty of unusual photos and clips. Sometimes it looked like staged scenes with children or cartoon characters. Other times, it was crude photo edits where he had literally pasted his own hands into someone else's images. What shocked people even more was that he never tried to cover it up. On the contrary, he often wrote captions that looked like bizarre fan messages, frequently mentioning My Little Pony and other well-known cartoon franchises. But that wasn't all. Edgar often engaged in pointless online quarrels, throwing insults at both random people and fictional characters. Not long ago, for example, he even started an argument with the fairies from Winx Club, creating imaginary dialogues where he always claimed victory. Another detail noted by users was his obsessive way of watching followers. He would spam direct messages, constantly like posts, and leave endless comments, almost like he was stalking them. In some cases, this behavior went on for weeks. One Reddit user even shared an email from him, written in his typical style, again rambling about cartoon characters and shoes. The biggest question, however, was about the people appearing in his videos.